I'm Rick Albert, and welcome to The Key to the City of Angels, the podcast where we unlock the secrets of Los Angeles real estate. With over 300 real estate deals under my belt, I've seen it all, from house hacking strategies that build wealth to helping clients close multi-million-dollar deals in one of the most competitive markets in the world. Every week, I'll bring you expert insights, market trends, and inspiring success stories to help you navigate the LA real estate scene. Whether you're a first-time buyer, an investor, or just curious about what it takes to thrive in the City of Angels, this podcast is your guide to making smarter decisions and achieving your goals. So grab your keys. It's time to unlock your path to prosperity in Los Angeles real estate. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Keys to the City of Angels. My name is Rick Albert, your host, and I have Allen Duan with Hospy Homes. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I love connecting with others in the real estate space, especially locally here in LA. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. So kind of talk about what you guys do, as well as like, how did you get into this?
Yeah, that is a story. So we essentially are a property management company for furnished rentals. So we manage short-term as well as midterm rentals here in LA County, a little bit of North Orange County. So very similar to what you would expect a long-term property manager to do, except we just focus on furnished. So that's the easy part. That question's easy to answer. Man, if I were to kind of sum it up, I got started with a couple of friends in 2017 doing rental arbitrage. And I could talk about, that's a whole different thing I could talk about. But essentially, a friend of mine, he found a guy on YouTube talking about this new strategy back then and teaching a course and all that. So we got a one unit, or my friend got one unit. It did great, especially during the summer. We were by Disneyland, and we're like, let's get more. Long story short, we had 13 arbitrage apartments before the pandemic. Moved out of all of them because Disneyland closed for a very long time. And then that's around the time we also started shifting toward this management model and just understanding the pros and cons of arbitrage versus management. And that's what we do now.
And so for those listening, arbitrage is basically, you're effectively subleasing from a landlord.
Exactly.
For short-term rentals, and everyone's in the understanding of what you're doing.
Yes, the right way to do it, of course, is with permission to sublet, to furnish, and then sublet at a furnished rate.
Okay, so yeah, just so people who are listening, because it has gained some popularity, but one of the downsides I've kind of seen with it, like you're not really building wealth because you don't own the property.
Yeah, it's
always kind of the challenge.
Yeah,
exactly. It's kind of like flipping homes, right? Like you can flip homes or you can rent homes.
Yep.
One's active, one's more passive.
Yeah, it's much more legitimate now. I remember when we were doing it, like almost all landlords would be like, what? So much risk.
Yeah.
I can't choose my tenants, parties, and all this stuff. But there are a lot more professionalized arbitrage operators now. So it's a very viable business model. It just has pros and cons like anything else.
Yeah, just like anything else. Exactly. So kind of talk about, so there's three different, on the traditional rentals, there's three different ones, right? There's long-term, which is you just lock in a tenant and they're there for at least a year, typically, sometimes longer. You have the opposite, which is short-term rentals, which is like the Airbnbs, the VRBOs. It's someone that's going to stay there for like a day. And then you have this midterm rental, which is, I guess, why don't you kind of explain what that difference is versus, let's say, a long-term rental?
Yeah. So the simplest difference is the length of stay, right? So midterm typically is 1 to 6 months. And a lot of what brought around the midterm rental strategy is, especially in LA, is the regulatory piece. So a lot of cities here are very strict regulations, and the definition for a short-term rental is less than 30 days. So essentially, you take an Airbnb, make the minimum night stay 30, then you got a midterm rental, right? That's like, I guess, the bare minimum for a midterm rental. But beyond the length of stay, naturally, the marketing, the type of person who's renting it, very different. So that really changes into, the people talk about insurance bookings, corporate rentals where businesses rent for their employees. They do use a site like Airbnb, but there's other avenues as well. So it's a furnished rental like a short term. It's just available for longer stays.
Got it. So then so I guess there's two, let me rephrase that. One of my biggest challenges would be the turnover. Turnover gets very expensive.
Sure, yeah.
So how do you address something like that?
Yeah. So great question. There's a spectrum, right? If I had a whiteboard outside drawing, But on one end of the spectrum is long term, the other end is short term, and midterm is the middle. So from the operational piece, as far as
Hmm.
turnovers, right? Obviously, long term is less work and short term is more, midterm is the middle.
Hmm.
But also in the same way, typically for most properties, if you could short term rent it, you get more income, right? Long
Hmm.
term is the least, midterm is in the middle. So it is more work, and this is the whole, pros and cons of what kind of strategy someone prefers. You can make more money, and of course, if you're making enough to cover that additional expense, your team and whoever's helping you, it could be more profitable than long term. But again, if you don't want to deal with that, then of course that's a negative. So midterm, I found a lot of owners who self-manage a midterm, they like it because they get some more cash flow in the long term, but that turnover burden is much more manageable, right? If you have one property, it's like once every few months, right? Very manageable.
Mm.
And then you get good rent. And tenant quality wise, midterm rental tenants also great.
Yeah, explain why. Why would that be any different than a long-term tenant?
Yeah, good question. So I believe that of the three categories, midterm rental tenants are the best. We all know short-term rental guests and the horror stories. I have a bunch of horror stories I could share for short term. Long term, most people understand. So midterm, I believe it's because it's a very specific slice of the population that's renting a midterm rental. So there's probably 6 or 7 categories of all our tenant types. And they always want, so a common question we get, especially in California, is like, what about squatters, right? What's this, there's a risk for that.
Hmm.
I say like there's a risk of squatters for long term, the same, right?
Hmm.
But
Sure.
for midterm, people, if you're, at least the people that we want to rent to, they always are, they have somewhere to go when their stay ends. So insurance booking, my house got damaged, the repairs are done, I'm going home. I'm here for work, I want to go back to my family when I'm done, right? To my hometown. So we're not just renting a midterm rental, someone who's looking for their next home, because that's kind of like nebulous how long they'll be there. Yeah, so because it's of that specific population. And also, some people will choose a midterm rental when they're traveling, they're renovating their homes, so they tend to be higher income. So really, it's just like a very specific. It's not just marketing to any like the overall population.
I didn't think about that. 'Cause that's a really good point.
Yeah, so
Because
people like that.
screening always
Yeah,
scares the
especially if
crap
you
out of
come from
people.
yeah, if you come from the short-term rental world, and you've dealt with that, and you go to midterm, it's like, oh my gosh, the we call them guests. The guests are so much better than short-term guests.
I didn't think about that. You're right. Great, because like traveling nurses, wherever they have somewhere to go.
Yeah.
So funny enough, before this call, I was like, yeah, I know I got one client that wants to do it, another client. I actually do remember the third one.
Okay.
So the third one, longtime client of mine, he's doing midterm
Okay.
and he's doing it near Culver City,
Cool.
but he's on the LA side. But
Yeah.
you're right, he was getting people that actually were from the East Coast that just want better weather for a couple
Mhm.
months. He was getting actually older people that were
Okay.
visiting family
Yeah.
and they
Perfect.
just wanted their own space.
Yep.
But what he liked about it was because he originally it was a duplex. He lived in the front, did short midterm in the back. But he's like, it was nice because if I had family come, they could
Yeah.
hang out there. Like the space was actually flexible.
Yes. We have some client, we have a client actually also in Culver City area. They have a one bedroom, like it's essentially it's a duplex, but they have a one bedroom unit next to where they live that we manage for them as a midterm. And yeah, if they needed it for personal use, it's right there. And because it's not a long-term tenant, they can say, hey, let's block off Christmas for personal use, and then it's available for them.
Got it. Now, have you noticed those don't tend to do as well? Not because the quote unquote vacancy, we know they're occupying it, but just like if it's a desirable property but it's just never available, people might be turned off and skip on to the next one.
No, I don't think that's an impact, and mainly because if there is, we call them owner blocks on the calendar. If there's an owner
Hmm.
block, it's further in advance. So another thing with midterm rentals, this is similar to short term. We find people are booking. So I use a lot of short-term rental language like reservations, booking, guests.
Hmm.
People are booking typically one, maybe at months, two, at most 2 months in advance. So midterm rental
Mm.
bookings are not way far in advance. So if someone has like, Christmas block because they have plans, obviously right now it's way early, but it's, theoretically it would reduce the chance of someone who wanted, let's say, like 3 months through December. But there's enough other inquiries for the other time that's available essentially.
So really, if you're the owner, the trick is really to have your full calendar laid out in January. That's really what you shouldn't
Yeah.
wait till the last minute.
Yeah, yeah. So like, yeah, I would say so.
Okay. Now explain to me kind of like the screening process. Because like one of the things I've noticed with luckily, I myself have had good luck, knock on wood, with tenants here in LA. Haven't had
Yeah.
any problems. I'm down to one rental right now. It'll eventually turn into two. But 99% of the time, people have had bad tenants. I've always said, well, what was your screening process? And it's
Yeah.
usually because they didn't do enough screening or they made an exception. And it's the exception that bit them in the ass. So, how do you vet someone that's only going to be there for a couple months?
There are similarities to the long-term kind of process.
Hmm.
So part of this question comes down to the channel that they found us. So Airbnb, for example, they Airbnb doesn't allow you to contact the potential guest or tenant before booking off the platform, right? They want to make sure you stay
Hmm.
on the platform. They want to get their
Sure.
fees. So you can't do a typical like, hey, fill out an application, do background check, right? You have to be messaging on there. So with Airbnb, there are reviews, whatever that's worth. That's something we'll look at. I haven't heard people doing this with success, but if you were to do a background check, a traditional background check for an Airbnb booking, you'd have to do it after they book and then figure out, are you going to cancel on them if they don't pass it? So it gets complicated. So for me, my business, we ask them typical questions, right? What brings you to the area? Like, oh, I'm here for work or whatnot. And we'll look at the
Mhm.
reviews. That's worked for us. Now, if it's a direct booking where there's no middleman like Airbnb, we will do the normal background checks that are typical for long term. You have direct communication. You can do all that just like you do for long term.
Okay. So really Airbnb is a little bit of a quote unquote risk, but it's not
Yeah,
really as risky because you have like legit reviews.
yeah. So
Hopefully.
it is I guess you could call it risk in the sense that there's less you could confirm. So I know
Sure.
some operators who, I would say are maybe more risk averse and they don't want to use Airbnb for that reason. The
Yeah.
business point of view, there's just so much traffic on there, you lose out a lot if you don't. So personal choice, of course, right? For your own property or if you manage for others.
Yeah. That's fair. Like it's kind of like when I would post my rentals and like I would do Facebook Marketplace
Sure.
and I have gotten tenants from there, but you get bombarded with a ton of
Sure.
wasted time.
Yeah.
Like my favorite was a couple of years ago, I had an ADU that was renting of mine, and we had like 50 inquiries in like a day. I'm like, great, I'm booking them all within this open house, right? Because doing individual showings wasn't
Oh yeah.
working because there's just a high no-show rate. 17 confirmed, only two showed up.
Yeah.
But it's like, but you still have to post on Facebook Marketplace because you still might find a
Guess
tenant,
some. Yeah, exactly.
right? Like there still might be something there.
Yeah.
So how do, because I've looked into doing short-term rentals for myself. I decided to pass on it for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons was, you know, people you say, oh yeah, you get 30% more in rent. But it's like, but do you? Because you have utilities, you have internet, you have all these extra costs that you
Yep.
wouldn't normally have. So really the numbers were either the same as long term, in which case, why am I going to go through the hassle? Or actually worse? What have you seen in the midterm market? And I know you're somewhat biased because what you do, but it'd be interesting if you saw any, like, how's
Yeah,
that a lot of
yeah.
that works?
No, that's yeah, a great question. I do make it a point to look at this from our owners' perspective, right? Our
Mhm.
clients, the homeowners. Obviously, they're still signed up with us, so it works out for them. But you're completely correct. Whether short-term or midterm, compared to long-term, you have a few additional expenses, namely utilities, right? Because these tenants, these guests expect utilities to be included for a short stay. The other one, pretty negligible, is the supplies, like the paper products, soap, right? That's a pretty small expense. Some numbers I could give you to kind of like overall average all of our properties, and I think it's true of our market here in LA. The midterm rental rates we see are about 1.5 to 2 times long term, right?
Wow. Okay.
Double, right? That's great. The double usually is when it comes to insurance bookings, those tend to pay better. There are other expenses, right? Another thing that people tend to forget is it's not 100% occupied. Not all 12 months are booked. So
Right.
typically we see 80% occupancy. That's a little bit less than 2 months vacant. And that's usually with midterm rentals, like all these gaps, right? Like a week gap here, a 3-day gap here that adds up. So I tell people, there's this 1.5 to 2x multiple, 80% occupancy, a few $100s for utilities a month. And for our properties we manage, when I've looked at that, our owners tend to make 10 to 15% more than long-term rates, and that's after our fee. So if they were self-managing it, it would be even more.
Got it. So there's still, even on top of the utilities and everything, there's still more margin to be had.
There is, yeah.
So,
Short term, I think is even better. I mean, short term is much more location specific, right? But if you, I
mhm,
mean, also regulations are hard. But let's say you short term, I don't know, Santa Monica, right, or Anaheim, it would probably do great. But
yeah.
regulations.
Yeah, right. Well, it's funny because I had clients who did it, Airbnb, and they were very successful at it.
Okay.
And I said, what was kind of like the key to that success? And like, it's like the stock market. You have to watch it literally every day and price it accordingly. So
The
if you have a,
pricing is the whole thing. Yep.
right, so I had one where she's like, yeah, we had literally a vacancy for 2 days in the middle of the week.
Yep.
So I just dropped it to make it dirt cheap because some money's better than no money.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
So it's
Dynamic
just,
pricing, they call it. Yeah. So
there
for
you
short
go.
term, every day is different. There are some great tools out there. And to me, it's like a mandatory. You have to use a dynamic pricing tool. Some people have their Airbnbs and it's like the same price every day. Maybe weekends are a little
Mm,
bit higher. And like,
yeah.
the pricing tool helps do what exactly we just mentioned, but automates it for you.
Right. Yeah. Because that's where, for me, that was actually one of the reasons why I chose against it. I'm like, I don't have the time to be looking at this
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
And yes, there's management companies out there. So, but some of those, well, we'll get into that. So, give me an idea of what your pricing model looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. So our fees are pretty similar to the industry standards. For midterm rentals, we do 15% of the gross rent. Short-term rentals typically is 20 and 25. And this is, from what I know of other managers across the country, it's similar. We don't have like sometimes people from the long-term rental world will ask, like, do you have like a tenant placement fee? For midterm rentals,
Hmm.
it doesn't make sense, right? We have so many tenants a year. So it's just a percentage of the gross rent. We have something that's kind of common from the short-term rental world called a tech fee, because a lot of the technology, there's much more like the pricing tool, much more technology used to kind of handle all this additional, operational burden. And those apps charge per property. So we essentially pass it on to our owners.
Okay, so you charge 15%. Do you charge, so like one of the challenges with property management is it's actually very expensive. Like I have rental properties in other states, and
Right.
people are like, well, how much do they charge? Like they don't just charge 10%. They
Yeah,
charge placement.
other
They
stuff.
will
Yeah,
upcharge on maintenance. Like that 10% actually ends up being like 15 to 18%.
sure.
But it's one of those like necessary evils,
Yeah.
right? Like you're like, you guys are charging a lot just to like process a credit card, but then at the same time, it's like, but I need you. So for you guys, do you guys upcharge for like maintenance requests? Like, or is that actually on the owner? So like if there's a roof leak, who handles that?
Yeah, yeah. So we do take care. So we are full service property management company. I'm not licensed myself. I partner with the broker for that requirement. So we do take care of the maintenance for our property, for owners. We get quotes for bigger projects, get their approval and all that. We don't, if we have a handyman come out to do something, we're just whatever cost the handyman charges is what we
Sure.
deduct. Yeah. So, but yeah, I totally understand that long-term world, how that works. So we want to simplify our fee model. So it's just the 15%, and then it's $100 a month tech fee for all the apps, and that's it.
So in some ways, you actually might be cheaper than some property managers out there.
Maybe, yeah. And keep in mind,
Yeah.
part of this, like I get for long-term rentals, they probably can't stay in business if all they charge was their fee, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what it
So
is.
for us, I mentioned earlier, the midterm rental rates are higher. So with that 15%, the goal is that it's a simple model and it covers what we need to stay in business.
Right. And to be fair, in LA, property management fees are usually much less than
Oh yeah,
10%.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. In other states, they tend to be for that very reason. It's like how I can't pay my staff on $100 a month
Yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever it is, right? So anyway, so it actually might be a wash once you start factoring in the turnover
sure.
and all that, in which case, like, yeah, if you're making more money, then it could be a viable option. So, for those of you who are listening, I met Alan through my landlords group that I have. There's a lot of landlords, housing providers, whatever you want to call them, whatever political, whatever. So, who would be a good fit for a midterm rental versus the long term?
You mean like
Like
the
I own a property.
yeah.
When should I be looking at midterm versus long term?
And in this scenario, would you be self-managing?
We'll do one self-managing or hiring someone like
Okay.
yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So we talk a lot about the financial kind of difference with
Mhm.
midterm, but there's a few other benefits I'll say for midterm compared to long term, why some of our clients choose to do it. So besides, more cash flow, which everyone likes, the second most common, we touched on this earlier, is the flexible personal use of the home. So we have one
Mhm.
client, for example, he he lives into, like both coasts. So he comes to LA every summer and usually for Christmas. He has a condo here, and when he's gone, he can't long-term rent it, obviously. He can't short-term rent it because of HOA regulations. So the midterm rental option is like how he could cover his costs while he's not there, right? I don't know about his other home on the East Coast. Maybe he rents that also. That'd be smart to me. Like I
Right.
mentioned, there's another client, or actually maybe two or three like this, where the property was their former home and they moved out of state and
Hmm.
they have roots here. So when they will come back to visit, they love to have the option of staying in their old home, right? Sentimental. Sometimes they will purposely, if they're flexible, they'll look at the calendar because they don't want to lose out on bookings. They'll see, hey, there's a gap here between two longer stays. I'll just come visit during that gap. It's vacant anyways. Right. So that's the value there.
Mm.
I would say another benefit is some owners who do choose MTRs, the ability to clean and do maintenance more frequently throughout the year versus, a tenant moves out after 5 years and the whole place has to be gutted, right? So that's, kind of a personal if someone enjoys it or not. But, we have, let's say on average 3 month stays, you're going to a property 4 times a year to do a deep cleaning. There's some benefits there. And the last one I'll mention that I don't hear talked about often and is relevant here in LA is technically you can raise the rent from booking to booking because you're remarketing it again. So you're not locked into like I currently rent and I love my below market rent in my home right now because it doesn't match the market, the annual rate increases. So you're not locked into a situation, after 1, 2, 3, 4 years, where you're still getting the same rent from that same tenant.
Got it. And it's funny because I've been bringing up this conversation about midterm rentals to some of my clients who live there, but they're thinking about moving and turning into a rental
Okay.
because I'm like, yeah, but you could also just leave your furniture behind.
Yeah, that is a plus for a lot of people who buy their homes, right? Because
Right.
that hurdle of the initial investment is not there.
Exactly. Right. Because that's also like has to be part of your analysis. It's almost like a rehab budget, but it's like it's a
Yes,
furnishing budget.
exactly.
Like I have a client, she's looking to possibly moving out of the country for a few years for work.
Yeah,
And we talked about that. And I was like, well, I know the company could pay for all your furniture, but if your goal is to get a certain dollar amount per month, why not just leave the furniture? Like,
yeah.
why go through the headache?
Yeah,
Right? Like,
some people they don't want to like it's a cost to them to get rid of furniture. Like I don't have to
yeah.
pay that cost now. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's so funny. Like I've had stuff where like I just post on Facebook Marketplace for free. I'm like, I just want it gone.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like a bad couch or something like that. They're like,
Yeah.
why don't you try to sell it? I'm like, I don't have the time to haggle.
Yeah. Just
I
please
had
take
someone haggle me over
it.
like $10. I'm like, dude, I don't have
Yeah.
time for this. So, so yeah, okay. So basically, those who are intending to use it, right? Those are like the part of
Part-time
the
use.
year,
Sure. Yeah.
right? Part-time use is, I would imagine, would be probably one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, it's
I
pretty
would
common, I'm
think.
sure in LA. Yeah.
Yeah. And then have you noticed specific months where you tend to have more vacancy, right? So like if I have a midterm rental, I'm going to be like, well, if I'm going to use my property, I might as well use it during a time that nobody else is using it.
Yeah, yeah, of course, like if you would have that kind of flexibility. The seasonality, compared to like short-term rentals, like
Hmm.
the peaks and valleys are much more subtle. But generally, right after summer, there's a lull, and so I would say, what is that? October probably is the slowest month. And
Hmm.
part of it is, there are more people who rent midterm rentals in the summer. There are people who rent a longer stay for leisure travel. Maybe they have family in the area and they can remote work and stuff like that. So we find after summer there's a lull. There's a kind of a smaller lull right after the holidays, like January, February, but it's actually been pretty good this month. Yeah, so I would say right after summer is the slowest. But again, looking at if you were like charted out like the whole year, it's not a big drop. It's just kind of noticeable, but it's, you could say that is one benefit as well from someone thinking about short term and midterm. I think of the whole, when you invest in the stock market, if you have I don't know what the word is called, but my mom used to be like this, where she'll check the price every day, like, oh no, it went down. Oh yeah, it went up. Right. If you're not comfortable with short term, where each month your revenue could really swing and that kind of like stresses you out, midterm rental offers a lot more, I guess flatness in your month to month income.
More stable, right? Which is gearing towards the long term.
Yeah, yeah. So you have some more, but you don't have, like, oh my gosh, this month, I had no bookings, that kind of thing that you typically have with short term.
Got it. Okay, so that makes sense. And then in terms of like, it'd be interesting to see like what kind of areas, right? Like
Mhm.
I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I tell people I'm a smartass, not a know-it-all. Like areas like maybe downtown LA, West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, like some of those areas might do really well because, like, hey, if I'm going to stay somewhere in LA, I want to stay in LA versus coming into, let's say, the Valley or like even going to Santa Clarita. Like, what areas have you noticed have done well versus other areas you're like, nah, dude,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
working.
Another common question, yeah, I get asked is I find, so I'll speak specifically for SoCal, and I imagine this is true for other urban markets.
Hmm.
It's not so much location, it's more about the property and neighborhood has to be nice enough. And I would say it's like, Class A, Class B neighborhoods. The home doesn't have to be brand new, where people feel, relatively comfortable staying. And the reason where that kind of comes from is if you think about the tenant types,
Hmm.
like the areas you mentioned earlier for short term make a lot of sense. But we'll use insurance bookings as an example. Anywhere where people live where they could have fire or water damage to their house, they need insurance bookings. Anywhere, right? That's not
Hmm.
specific. It's kind of random. And I know right now it's very relevant with the fires.
Sure.
So that's not like certain spots are better than others. People traveling for work, sure, right? That's when you want to be closer to those places. But from my experience, like, so our current properties kind of range. Let's see, Santa Monica's the furthest north. We have down to like North OC, and we have a like Diamond Bar's our furthest east. All those areas could do well. So it is more about the property than it is about specific like cities and neighborhoods.
Okay, so then let's talk about the property. What are some of the things that people, what would make a good MTR? Is it like an ADU, right? Accessory dwelling unit studio, or is it like the Beverly Hills Mansions?
So the higher end homes, they work great for short term for obvious reasons. They tend
Sure.
to not work for midterm because there's such a small group of people who need that, right? Who will pay for it for that long, right? So that's one thing I'll say.
Hmm.
It's kind of an easy answer there. I would say then like homes that are bigger than 5 bedrooms, that margin of how much you could get over long term gets smaller, I would say, with long term probably is better. The most sought after home for midterm rentals is a 3 bedroom home, 3 bed, 2 bath, single
Hmm.
family. And it makes sense. It's the, most, I would say, most common type of home. It's the average American family size, what they need. And then from the insurance point of view, that's probably the home they're staying in, that got damaged. So if you were like, trying to buy a property from midterm rentals, that's I think the best. So again, coming from the customer, the tenant point of view, families, that's one category of midterm rental tenant types. The other is individuals or maybe a couple traveling for work, usually. Then for them, they like the 1 bedroom is plenty. So there's almost this like two columns of like what does a individual or a couple want need and what does a family need. So if I think if you had a 1 bedroom, it could do well as MTR. That's, I mean, you don't usually buy a 1 bedroom, right? That's like maybe a duplex or ADU. We have some
Right.
ADUs we manage, but that's not to say a 2 bedroom can't do well. We have 2 bedrooms that do well as well. But it's just, thinking about who's renting, where they want to stay. There's a lot of kind of similar to your question about the property, the amenities piece. A lot of people
Hmm.
come from the short-term rental world and have this, property set up for short-term. Great design, great photos are very important as well for midterm, but you tend to need more of less of the fun stuff, like, oh, all these games in the backyard, an arcade machine. And it's more about having a comfortable couch, comfortable mattress, right? Things people care about if you're sleeping there more than 3 days, right? Yeah, that's where those investments make more sense for MTRs.
Have you seen bedrooms being converted to offices doing
Yeah,
well?
so I would say if you have like 4 bedrooms or more,
Mhm.
or if you have an office that has a bedroom, because if you lose out in that bedroom
Then it
entirely,
becomes a two bedroom.
yeah, it makes it harder to market. But in MTR, I recommend you should always have some sort of desk office somewhere. Like that's just like a in the master bedroom somewhere, right? Where you close the door, because a lot of people are remote working when they rent these.
Right. Okay. I had a client once, we sold his house and it had like actually a built-in desk, but it was foldable.
Oh, nice.
It
I
was
like
kind of
that.
cool, right? So it
Yeah,
was like,
yeah,
yeah, it was in like a loft area of the house. It was like, yeah, if I want to work, I bring it down. If I don't
yeah,
want it, I put it back up. But that way you like don't lose out on space.
exactly.
So like, have you seen like Murphy beds, things like that do well? Because that way the room becomes more versatile, or did I just give you an idea?
Yeah. I think we have one property, maybe two with Murphy beds. It was
Yeah.
something the owner had set up. Most of the time, it's just a desk in a bedroom. Yeah, so you
Keep
just
it simple.
yeah, you
They're
advertise that
expensive.
there's a workspace. And unless the room is really tight, then I think having a regular bed is fine.
Okay. Now you mentioned the insurance, kind of shifting gears. Unfortunately, we did have these fires. It's really unfortunate, but I guess like how did that transition happen? Because these people, some are going to need something short term if they just had, let's say, smoke damage, right? Maybe they weren't in Pacific Palisades, maybe they were in Brentwood.
Sure.
So they're only going to need something for a couple months. But the people for the Palisades, they're going to need something for 3 to 5 years, unless they decide to move on.
Sure.
So what have you actually seen? First of all, have you seen any difference since the fires? Are you like
It
now
ha-
fully booked?
it has been so busy since the fires. It's been what, maybe three
I would
weeks now.
imagine.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so and this is something I've been thinking a lot about as far as this furnished rental space and the role we could play right now. I obviously don't have enough properties that we manage to serve all the families. I try to
Sure.
play a role of connecting families with other MTR operators I know in the area, just in my network.
Hmm.
But so what we've seen, we've had as short as a 4 day stay at a short-term rental because for that family, they just had to evacuate, but their home was fine, right? Because obviously they're just waiting to go back, right? If everything's
Hmm.
okay. And then we have this is actually unheard of pre-fires, insurance bookings looking for 12-month stays.
Right.
Typically, when we have insurance bookings, like the most common, burst, a pipe that burst, it usually is like a 2 3 month stay, and they might extend, however
Hmm.
long it takes the home to get repaired. So the fact that there's right off the bat a 12-month request for a furnished rental, it just shows people know right off the bat they need at least that long, right? So
Right.
very changes with the fires as far as those inquiries and how that works. My feel is that yeah, I think it'll take definitely more than a year before people can move back right to the communities. I'm sure no one's gonna like sign some super long lease. They can obviously extend their stays, and people probably don't know what they're going to do from a year from now. They're kind of figuring it
Right.
out. And I'm curious to see how it plays out as far as people who might leave LA permanently. They might leave and
Yeah.
come back. I'm curious right now, like how many people are staying with family and friends, how many are hotels, right? Because I think it was 10,000 plus homes lost, right?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting, but yeah, that's kind of how we've seen it on our side. We have a lot of in the mental space, if you just list on Airbnb, for example, or some other sites like that, that's not the best way to succeed. So we have a lot of B2B partnerships with whether it's where the insurance bookings come from or other kind of bookings. So all of those sources have been sending us, inquiring about all of our properties. We have one in Pasadena that, not surprisingly, very popular. A lot of someone was about to rent it, they didn't sign the lease, so then we opened it up and someone else came right away. It just, that property is our closest property to the affected areas. But yeah, it's been busy, definitely.
So, okay, you brought up something interesting. If they want to extend, they can.
Yes.
But how can you extend if you have another booking lined up?
If so, this is the way we do it.
Okay.
There's another way we do it. There's kind of two ways. Generally, a lot of this with midterm rentals, there's kind of this short-term rental approach versus long-term. I lean
Hmm.
toward treating midterm rentals like a short-term rental.
Right.
So if someone rents, we'll just say a 3 month booking, they give us a checkout date, right? So it's different than long term where it's not like they're staying there until they give us notice. We ask for a move out
Hmm.
checkout date. So technically, we are always marketing the future dates after that. So when
Right.
someone does ask for extension, if it's not available, we let them know. Some
This is
MTR
what it is.
operators, they treat it like a long term. They'll just stop marketing entirely until they get their 30-day notice. So there's kind of two ways of doing it.
As an investor, would I want it to be continued to be marketed? I think so.
Yes,
Right? Like, wouldn't that make better business sense?
yeah,
Because
that's why we do it.
vacancy is rough.
Yeah, because again, this 1 to 2 month we call booking lead time. We want to give more time for people to look, right? Have that
Right.
availability there. Sometimes people who book further advance might pay more. So that's where the dynamic pricing kind of also affects midterm. It's not just flat monthly rate every month. So
Right.
yeah, we definitely choose it. I mean, we do this way for a reason. Yeah.
And then if they choose to extend, you just keep them at the same rate.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what we tell them.
Right.
Yep.
Which is a fair compromise because if you're the owner, like, well, I also don't want to deal with vacancy. But
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what kind of turnover? I know we talked about before, but besides cleaning, because there's no furniture being moved, there's really not much on the turnover space.
Yeah, yeah. So we don't do like, for example, we don't do a move out inspection with the tenants, and that's a business
There's-
choice, right? You definitely can. We do a cleaning and inspection right after they leave that same day. And this is, I would say, where it's very similar to how short-term rentals are managed. So we do a cleaning, we do a very detailed inspection. We essentially could then compare to like, hey, when you came in, this thing was here, now it's broken. So we know you broke it, right? And then there's different ways as far as like guest damages. This is a common question we get as well. Airbnb bookings, they have air cover, right? Where Airbnb will help cover damages caused by guests. And then if you have like a direct booking, you do security deposit, very similar to long term. There's some other interesting, options besides those two, but that's the primary ways. But we'll do that inspection. We'll see what's going on. You make repairs. Usually, if it's a shorter stay, we can have the property ready in a few days. We've had like year-long stays, it might take up to a month to turn it around. So it depends. Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of the insurance stuff, so you actually have direct ties to insurance companies and they'll reach out to you directly?
So the insurance companies, at least here in SoCal, they typically outsource to relocation companies, and
Okay,
those
fair
companies
enough.
we have relationships with. Yes.
Okay. Which kind of gives you a competitive edge because not everybody has those.
Yeah, it's so any if you're self-managing, you have one MTR, you can get those relationships. You just,
Hmm.
it could be they've contacted you through some channel and you just keep up with them. The angle we take because we have the inventory is I hope my goal is that they remember me as far as all their LA housing needs. Like, oh yeah, Hospy Homes, right? Like they always have something available every time I contact
Hmm.
them. Yeah, and that part is to me like the hardest part of MTRs is this
Yeah.
marketing, getting the booking part of it, because it is much more manual than short term. Short term rentals, if you have a pretty place and the photos are great, you can throw on Airbnb and then people just instant book, right? That part can be
Right.
pretty easy. So yeah, there's a lot of proactive effort to maintain relationships, just basic networking. Hey, this is what I do. Happy to offer housing for all your needs and stuff like that.
Okay, very nice. Yeah, because one of the things that's in your line of work, you have like two ends of it. You
Yeah.
have to recruit business, you have to recruit the houses, and then you also have to recruit the people to book it. So you're like, it's almost like two businesses.
There's marketing and like two different types of marketing we have to do. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I have a client, he does it on the drone side. So he
Oh,
has, it's like two sides. So he has to find drone pilots, but then he also has to find people to use the drone pilots.
got it. Okay, yeah.
Right. And then he's that intermediary. So no, I totally get it. And then, because like part of the reason why I was really excited to talk to you is like, it's like, okay, midterm rental sounds interesting. A strategy that I had, and anyone who's listening, if you want to steal the strategy, go ahead. I'd love to represent you on the buys here in LA. I think there is a demand for like small homes, small lots,
Okay,
right? Because they sell at such a steep discount because developers can't pick it up, whatever.
sure.
But the rents aren't that much different. So like your ROI could go up. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I guess the reason why I'm asking so again, the question is like, have you seen like lot differential, or is there something that people should be looking for in their analysis when they analyze these properties potential midterm rentals? What should they be looking at?
I don't have anything to offer as far as the lot size, that piece of
Sure,
it.
that's fine.
It
Yeah.
usually comes down to, yeah, like the bedroom counts, thinking about the group size, the family size, certain amenities that make a difference. A lot of that is on, if you're looking to buy something, right, a lot of it's on that's the furnishing design piece, which is obviously very flexible. If you're, hoping to serve more families and having like a fenced-in backyard, right, for pets and kids is valuable. Certain things that matter for long term don't matter for midterm, like school district doesn't matter as much, right? There's certain things MTR tenant will kind of put up with that long-term tenant might not as much. Maybe it's like
Hmm.
closer to like a commercial area or like heavier traffic. Like, oh, okay, a few months, not a big deal to me. Versus like, I don't want to raise my kids here, right? So generally, the things within the home make much more difference than what's outside of it relative to long term,
Interesting.
right? Just kind of
Right.
stepping
Yeah,
back
this
and
is
thinking
all
about
like
it.
opportunity costs. Like there's things you have to
Yeah,
factor
yeah,
in. But
yeah.
that means you even brought up an interesting point about busy streets. Have you noticed a difference there? Like, do you have clients who have properties on
We
busy
have
streets
not,
and it's
yeah, we haven't heard really any like the tenants complaining about that. So I think that's less of an issue than if it would be for long-term rental.
plus, I guess the expectation set, right?
Yeah,
Because I know with like the short-term rental space, that's like one of the biggest things is you have to set clear expectations up front.
very similar. Yeah, especially because for midterm, similar to short term, often people are booking sight unseen, right? They're looking
Right.
just for listing. So I will add insurance bookings. Typically, the family has to come see the place and approve it for the policy to, for to move forward. But
Okay.
typically, if it's Airbnb, it's like a short term. There is this balancing act, though, that I've learned. It's obviously in the listing, you want to make the property look as best as you can. but you don't want to make it look so nice and when they come, it's very jarring, right? That difference between expectation and reality, keep it a little bit better than reality, but not too much better, right? So,
That's yeah.
yeah, you don't want like a beautiful home with great photos, for your home, but then when they come, the neighborhood is like sketchy. That still has an impact on whether they want to stay.
It's interesting because my wife and I, we rarely use Airbnb when we travel,
Okay.
but we have used it before. Like we just got back from Europe and we used it
Okay.
because we needed the bedroom count, and it was an area where there actually weren't a lot of hotels.
Sure.
But I will say, over the last like 3 or 4 bookings, at least two, maybe even three, we just haven't had a great experience. Like to your point, like we see the photos. Yeah, we get there. Yes, it is the place. It's not like they lied,
Yeah, yeah,
but like it definitely looks older than what we were expecting.
yeah.
Or like there's just certain amenities like that I guess they were just kind of expected that just weren't
Sure.
there,
Yep.
But I would
Yeah.
imagine in the midterm space it wouldn't be as big a deal.
It applies to lesser degree.
Mm,
Again, because of that, you are providing more things than just the house itself. So,
sure.
if someone comes, I can't find a hair dryer, right? That also can happen for MTRs. In general, though, MTR, the guests are less needy, I would say, than short term. They're not
Mhm.
there on vacation, they're living somewhere in a home. So that makes it a little bit easier than short term. Yeah.
Uh, on the insurance side, you mentioned that they have to preview the home first. How do you do that if you already have tenants in place? Or is that like an expectation set?
Yeah, so we don't do showings if the home is occupied, right? Typically, insurance bookings, and I'm happy to kind of highlight the process.
Yeah, that'd be great.
They typically need a home right away, obvious reasons. So if we have a home, like someone just checked out, it's currently vacant, that's usually when they reach out and, they could have a showing. But essentially, the insurance company, obviously the family, contacts, puts in the claim. The insurance company will outsource to this relocation company. Typically that's what they're called, to find the housing. That's who then will start reaching out. They'll go on Airbnb. They'll go through all their channels. Hey, we got a family, needs a 3 bedroom in this neighborhood. Is your place available? Once they get approval of the terms, like the rent and any other fees, they get their adjuster to approve it. Like, cool, that's good. Let's get the family now to go look at maybe 3 houses we found for them. The family says, I like this one, and then it goes on. So that showing is kind of a sales opportunity to get the families okay, because ultimately they have to approve it. And then we do the lease and everything, they move in.
And then the insurance pays you directly or to the consumers and they get reimbursed?
It's typically the relocation company. I'm not sure
Mhm.
how the insurance company then work it out, but it's the relocation company that will pay us. Typically, the family staying in the home is responsible for the security deposit. It kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah,
But
'cause they don't trust in it.
the rent is from the relocation company, and the funds that obviously come from insurance ultimately.
So then for the leases, is
Mm.
it leased with the relocation company or is it with the consumer
Yeah,
or is it with both?
this
This is
is
where
a
it gets
tricky question.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So typically, it is with the relocation company,
Okay,
but the tenants are on the lease. In
sure.
Some people have it like I'm okay with that. Some people are like, hey, so, the party in charge of paying rent is not the party staying there. So what happens if they squat and don't leave? Like, who am I going to chase
Hmm.
down? I'm not a lawyer, so I think that's a great lawyer question. Generally, working with the relocation companies that are reputable makes me feel comfortable with that. It's worked out for us so far, but that's generally how it
Right.
works. Yeah, it's not directly with the tenant. Yeah.
Got it. But they're named on the lease. So if
Yes.
you do have to do some sort of eviction, it's not like these are strangers, quote
Yeah.
unquote. Like
Yeah.
you go to the judge and be like, first of all, you're the relocation company. That's a bad rep. And it's going to
Yeah.
cost them time and
Naturally.
money to
Yeah.
deal with
Yeah.
that. So, like, they don't want that either. Like,
Yeah.
it's to nobody's benefit.
Yeah.
So, do you use typical leases?
We do,
And
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so our lease so sometimes these companies have their own lease. We have our own. We created ours. It's, I would say, 85% similar to a long-term rental lease.
sure.
And of course, California specific. There's a few changes we added, like some properties we have a utility cap. So utilities are included,
You're the only other
conversation,
person I
right?
know besides me that does that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you do that for long term?
Yeah. Because
Okay.
if utilities are included,
Oh yeah.
I have to put a cap.
Yeah. There's no incentive for them to conserve.
And to be honest, like there may be months where they've gone over. I'm not gonna. It's like whatever, but it's more like symbolic. Like
Yes.
doesn't mean you can just abuse it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So midterm rentals, especially because utilities are always included. yeah, it's a way to maybe just helps adjust behavior, right? So that's something unique. Sometimes people will itemize furniture, which could be kind of tedious, but otherwise, when with the tenant laws in California, once they're there over 30 days, it is a tenancy, so you want to have the
Mhm.
same type of lease.
Got it. Okay, fair enough. Which then we'll go to the final question, unless there's anything else you want to touch about. So you have LA rent control. If rules are over 30 days, then those tenants would have those same rights. So is part of this kind of like, and maybe I'm answering my own question, like who cares because they have a place to go? So it just doesn't matter? Or is it like, no, this is something that we do have to factor in?
Are you talking about like rent increases?
No, like just the rental laws in general in LA with rent
Yeah.
control, like the laws tend to favor tenants.
Yes.
So yes, even though you're not locked into a year lease, but sometimes, and typically these rules apply to a year plus. But if you're helping insurance people where they may be there for more than a year, is that something that you've had to navigate through, or is that's the whole point of midterm rental is like it doesn't matter. And
Yes.
we know laws can change in case anyone's
Yeah,
listening.
yeah. It hasn't impacted us too much. So it's
Okay.
rare for us to have a stay over 12 months. That's the first thing I'll say. My understanding is once you're over 30 days, there are tenant rights there as
Mhm.
opposed to short term. So that to me is more of the what's the word? Minimum length of stay where this kind of applies. But as far as rent control, like, you know, yeah, it's not something we have to deal with. Like I mentioned earlier, if someone were to extend their stay, we would keep their same rate. But if they moved out, someone else came, then you could, have a new rate
Other
for
than
that
you.
next booking. But yeah, it is. We probably had two bookings ever that had been over 12 months, and it's kind of a unique situation. But yeah, at that point, people start looking for long-term rentals, right? If they know they need that long. Again, with the fires recently, it's a very unique situation that we
Sure.
don't typically see.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. This has been amazing. I know we kind of jumped around a little bit, so I do appreciate you
No,
keeping
no
up with
problem.
me.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you think would be really important for people in like the LA area to know about midterm rentals or what they should be looking for or anything like that?
Yeah. So I think we covered a lot of it, and I'm happy to if anyone wants to reach out. Like if someone has a property and they're wondering if it'll be a good fit, I'm happy to help work through that. It's we didn't talk too much about the regulatory piece here. A lot of the benefits that come from incrementals, if you can do a short term, it's also there, right? It's kind of why people do short term, the additional income and all that. So for me in my business, I think that the phrase midterm rental got popular in 2022 is by no means a new thing. Like corporate rentals
Right.
were around for a long time, right? But it became popular from people on YouTube, and I think more of like the typical mom and pop investors became aware of the strategy. We kind of fell into it by accident because of regulations, right? I got started, I mentioned, with short-term rentals.
Sure.
So a lot of people in LA and cities like LA who like a lot of these benefits, the flexibility, like it's pretty often I talk to someone who has a property and they're like, I want a short-term rent. Oh, I can't, regulations. Okay, I'll long-term rent, right? But it's like, wait, no, you still can. There's another option here. And I
For
think
once, there's actually a viable third option.
yeah, yeah. And where you get that additional, rent, you have the furnished model, other benefits people like about it. So I'm just trying to make people aware of the strategy, whether they self-manage or not. Like I'm very happy to help people self-manage and get set up with that. But yeah, I think it's still a relatively new strategy people haven't heard about. And just like short term have, some maybe inaccurate fears about it as well. So happy to help how I can with that.
I appreciate it. Well, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so if you guys want to learn about my business and see our like portfolio, like Hospy Homes, that logo there is our website. But let's see, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, Allen Duan 120 on all three of them. I have some content there, that I'm kind of started off doing, but happy to connect with anyone through those channels.
Well, thank you so much, Alan, for hopping on the show. I really appreciate it. And
Yeah,
maybe we'll touch base soon. We can kind of go over what's changed now that we're maybe 6 months to a
yeah,
year
yeah.
after the fires. It might be interesting if you see a difference
It
and we
would
can take
be.
a look at that data.
Yeah, would
So
love
we'll
to.
put it in the books.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in to The Key to the City of Angels. I hope you found today's episode helpful as you navigate the world of Los Angeles real estate. Whether you're looking to buy your first home, expand your investment portfolio, or sell in this competitive market, I'm here to help you succeed. Let's connect. Visit my website or follow me on social media to learn more about how I can help you achieve your real estate goals. And if you're ready to take the next step, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to work with you. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might benefit. Together, let's unlock your potential and make your real estate dreams a reality.